Your voice sounded just now as if it were bothered by something, Mr. Evans, said Sam, at last, after an embarrassing pause. It was in his instinctive recognition of all animal moods that this patient naturalist, transformed now into the latest Glastonbury saint, exploited his shrewdest wisdom. "Have you a cigarette, Decker?" asked Mr. Evans. Sam gave him one and struck a match. This ancient Promethean act brought the two men together as nothing else could have done just then. On a dark, rainy night, even the flicker of a match flame has a magical power, and the little circle of light extending outward from Sam's concave fingers illuminated not only Mr. Evans's hooked nose as he bent towards it, not only Sam's own retreating chin, but the frayed edges of a small duodecimo that the latter carried in his rough tweed-smelling jacket pocket. Duodecimo. "What's your book?" inquired the antiquary with professional curiosity. "Only a St. John's Gospel," answered Sam nervously, shoving the volume down further into its place and pulling his pocket flap over it to hide it. "The mayor's favorite book," remarked Mr. Evans. "He says it's the whole Bible of his new religion." "To-wit, to-hoo, to-wit, to-hoo," cried Elfin Cantle from the fence. "Listen, Evans." Sam blurted out the words hurriedly, and it was with a trembling hand that he lit a cigarette from himself now from the one which the other was smoking. "I've been thinking lately, Evans, that our Glastonbury Christ is like Osiris. They've cut him into fragments, and out of each fragment they've made a different person. I don't care much for this fourth gospel, that's why I've read it." Mr. Evans nodded his complete and entire understanding of such a motive. "My Christ's utterly different from Gaird's," Sam said, "and different from my father's. My Christ's like Lucifer, only he's not evil, at least not what I'd call evil. But he's the enemy of God, that is, he's the enemy of creation. He's always struggling against life as we know it. This cursed, cruel self-assertion, this prickling up of fins, this prodding with horns, this opening of mouths, this clutching, this ravishing, this snatching, this possessing. To-wit, to-hoo, to-wit, to-hoo," cried Elfin's voice. The lad was on the other side of the fence now. Mr. Evans cast his eyes round him. The half-moon was dipping, driving, diving, rearing, tumbling, toppling, under that strong, wet, westerly wind. Some of the clouds closest to it took on every now and then a momentary yellowness, sickly and unearthly, but most of them were of the color of cold steel. Mr. Evans snuffed the air like one of the seals of Proteus. He thought he could detect the smell of seaweed on the wind. "The tide must be high tonight at the Burnham mudflats," he thought to himself. "They must be afraid of the sluices breaking out there." "To-wit, to-hoo, to-wit, to-hoo." Elfin and his attendant owl were already across the sloping pasture in the direction of Maidencroft Lane. Mr. Evans took out his office bowler hat and, bending forward, tapped Sam on the shoulder with it. "Canst thou not minister to a mild mind disease?" he said. "You're the son of a priest, aren't you? Can't you say to the demon, 'Come out of him'?" There was a moment's pause, only broken by the little monotonous taps, like a man's knocking of water drops against doorpost, on Mr. Evans's hat upon Sam's shoulder. "There, I was only joking," cried the Welshman at last. "I expect you don't believe in miracles any more than you believe in the fourth gospel. You're listening to that boy, that's all you're doing. You're thinking of owls, as those rascals that come to my house just now were thinking of leases and communes. It makes me laugh the way you all go on, while all the time, the herring of Anwen." Here the man's face distorted itself, not with the coming on of that queer planetary laughing fit, which had seized him in the room, but with a similar feeling of isolation. "You don't even know what Anwen is," he murmured. Then, with a deep sigh, he replaced his hat on his head. "Complete is the captivity of Gwere and Care City," he groaned inarticulately, buttoning a loosened button of his right tight-fitting overcoat. "Elfin! Hello, Elfin, I'm going on," Sam's voice rang out across the fields in the direction of Maidencroft Lane. "No, I don't believe in miracles," he said gravely, "any more than Christ did. What he did was simply to use his will to kill his will." "To-wit, to-woo!" Elfin was at the fence again now, and his attendant bird in the darkness had apparently left him. Mr. Evans muttered something in Welsh. Thought that came into his heart was a thought of sick terror. "This man's Christ is a madman like I am. His will holds the rod over his will. He's all strain and torment. It's with torment he drives out torment. I ought never to have spoken to this man." Elfin joined them now, and they all three moved down Edmund's Hill Lane. Not a word did any of them speak till they turned to Wells Old Road. But all the while, just eluding his conscious mind, there hovered around Mr. Evans's soul the sinister impact of the dialogue he had not heard. "Will thick iron bar what you knows of man make my young man feel before he dies?" Let me do that again. This is in italics. I don't know who's saying it. "Will thick iron bar what you knows of make my young man feel before he dies?" Oh, that's, no. It sounds familiar. I think it's not that guy who saw Red Robinson? Maybe not. Even before they reached number 5 of Wells Old Road, or Old Wells Road, for both designations are in local use, Mr. Evans could see a light in Cordelia's bedroom. As his gate, he hesitated whether to bid his companions goodbye or to accompany them a step further. Any instinct in him difficult to analyze, perhaps a desire to test to the dregs the spiritual magic of this disciple of a non-miraculous Christ, made him decide to go on with them for a little way. "I'll turn back in Bove Town," he said to himself. Sam seemed surprised, and Elfin seemed definitely cross, that they had not been able to get rid of this disturbing intruder even when they passed his own gate. Once again a dead silence fell upon all three as they turned into Bove Town and walked along the well-worn flagstones of the raised path under the stone wall leading to High Street. Sam, it turned out, had to go into St. John's Church to make the necessary preparations, which his father usually made for himself for the morning's Mass. Elfin Cantle hoped against hope, indeed he actually prayed in his heart, that Mr. Evans would see fit to say goodbye to them at the entrance to the churchyard. The boy repeated under his breath, as they approached the great church tower, a sort of ritualistic incantation. "This bloke ought to go home, ought to go home, ought to go home. This bloke ought to go home when St. John's clock strikes the hour." I don't know, give it a shot. What was Elfin's consternation when this prayer of his was not only not answered, but the extreme opposite of it was brought to pass. "Good night, Elfin," said Sam when they reached the lamp, swinging from the arch above the entrance. "We mustn't take you any further out of your way." The boy stared aghast, his feelings smitten through and through as if by a catapult. "But, sir," he gasped. "But, sir." "But, Mr. Decker, I always helps thee with the ringings and rubbings." Ringings and rubbings. "I be especial good at it. Ye said your own self I were." "Shake hands with Mr. Evans, Elfin, and run off. There's a good lad. We've had a nice day together, and we'll have some more, but I'm busy now. Run off home to bed. There's a good kid." Not a motion did Elfin Cantle make to shake hands with Mr. Evans, or indeed to shake hands with Sam. He turned around, without a word, without a sign, and taking to his heels ran off at top speed. He dodged between the people and the pavement, he dodged between the vehicles in the street, and making for his room in the stucco tower, as a wounded animal makes for his lair, he never shed a single tear till he threw himself down, coat, cap, muddy boots, just as he was, prone upon his bed, and cried like an unhappy girl. But Mr. Evans, egocentric though he had grown to be, was not one to view a child's tragic discomfiture with equanimity. He felt angry with Sam. Did the fellow think that he couldn't have talked to him before that boy? Well, he certainly wasn't going to talk to him now. The fellow was a prig, a fool, an ass, to send that lad away. A lad called Elfin, too. And he had a curious expression under that lamplight. A funny face. An interesting face. Such were Mr. Evans's thoughts as he followed Sam into the church. "I know. You'll be pleased to see," said Sam, "what Father has done to St. Joseph's tomb." He led him to the famous empty sarcophagus, one of the most moving, if not one of the most authentic ossuaries of our planet's history, where the bones of the man who gave up his own tomb to Jesus are reported to have been laid. Mr. Evans could not see very clearly in the dim lamplight that radiated down the aisle what Sam's father had done, but it evidently was no great matter, for the tomb looked exactly as it had looked to him when he had visited in the early spring with the man who was now his father-in-law. But if Mr. Evans thought of his father-in-law as he stood tonight by that great scooped-out concavity, his companion had a much more poignant thought. For the image of Nell, as he had talked to her and quarreled with her here, before the begetting of their child, came with cruel vividness upon him. "I may never," Sam forced himself now to say, "have such a good chance to tell you, Evans, what I really feel about all these things." He leant forward wearily as he spoke, for he was tired and drowsy after his long walk, and he had never felt less clear-headed and less inspired. "What I feel is this," he went on, pressing both his hands against the rim of the tomb and bowing his head forward above the dusky emptiness. "I feel that the whole creation is on the wrong track, all scrambling for happiness and the satisfaction of the senses. I feel that the only thing to do is to follow Christ in making the will kill the will." He lifted his ill-mounted beast. Let me start that again. He lifted his ill-molded beast-like lineaments and darted a quick, nervous glance at the tall, black-coated figure standing aloof with his hands behind his back. "How like the shirt of Nessus is the cursed vice of mine," thought Mr. Evans, when, to his loathing, he found that the mere distress of this will-killing Christ-lover had begun to cause him a lively mental shiver of a dark sort of pleasure. The poor devil, he said to himself. "I must not let myself feel like this." Tightly he clasped his long fingers behind his back, squeezing them angrily together, so as to suppress his wicked feelings by their discomfort. Well, that's the end of Glastonbury for today. Till next time, have a good one.